Hi everyone. First of all, I want to wish you a great 2024. I hope that this will be an amazing year for you and your chess improvement. And to get some inspiration from the previous year, I decided to look at some of the greatest moves that were played in 2023. So let's start with the first one, and here the victim is none other than former world champion Magnus Carlsen. Here he is playing against a young grandmaster, Alisher Suleimanov, and here Magnus played somewhat strangely in the opening. His position is a bit passive, with a lot of pieces on the 8th rank, but here he plans to take the knight on g5. And here white, instead of retreating, played the shocking move knight takes f7. So sacrificing a knight for a very important pawn that is protecting the king. Black doesn't have anything better than to take the knight, and the idea is to follow up with c takes d5, building this very strong center, but black can capture on d5. If Magnus doesn't capture on d5, white has lots of ideas like taking on e6 or even playing d6, so this pawn has to be taken. Magnus took with the bishop, but if black takes with the pawn, we're gonna get a very similar idea. White's idea is to take on d5 with the rook. So Magnus took with the bishop, which makes more sense, activating the bishop, but the idea is to follow up with this exchange sacrifice by going rook takes d5, and after pawn takes and queen takes, king to f8 is forced. So in this combination, white ended up giving a full rook for just 2 pawns, but white is dominating on the light squares, and these 2 pawns are actually quite strong. There might be some ideas to push f4 and f5, but in this particular position, the main idea was to go knight to d4, and white has all sorts of threats here, like knight to e6, knight to c6, so amazingly, even though black is a full rook up, black's position is desperate. Here Magnus tried a knight to f4, knight to c7 looks like a logical move covering e6, but white's idea is to give a check and then go knight to c6 in this position. For example, after king to g8 and knight to c6, white attacks the queen, and after queen to b7, white wins the queen after knight takes e7, giving a check, and after knight takes, queen takes b7, white is winning a lot of material. In the game, Magnus tried another way to cover e6 by going knight to f4, but the problem is that after queen to f3, now this knight is pinned, so white is recovering material. Here Magnus tried king to g8, just giving the knight, but if black tries g5, after g3, white is winning a piece. So after king to g8 and queen takes f4, now white is only an exchange down for 2 pawns, so we have a material balance, and white is just totally dominating. The game ended after a few moves. Queen to b7, knight to f5, b5. Here Suleimanov played the very nice bishop takes b5. The point is that after queen takes, white takes on e7. So here Magnus tried bishop to f8, and after bishop to c4, king to h8. Here white played the very nice knight to h6, with the idea to take on f8 and also invade with the knight by going knight to f7. So white is having all the fun, and in this desperate position, Magnus decided to resign. In the next position, we have Magnus playing as white, and he's the one playing the amazing move. So here white has an advantage, but white has to be accurate because this pawn on d7 seems to be controlled, and black might start pushing the b pawn. So white has an extra pawn, but white has to be very precise. And one idea to promote the pawn was to go rook to f8. The point is that the knight on f6 is pinned, so black cannot capture on d7 with the knight, and after king takes, white would promote, and then white, with correct play, would be able to convert this extra exchange. But instead, in this position, out of nowhere, Magnus played the brilliant knight to g4, completely shifting the focus. Now the idea is going to be to checkmate black's king, which looks very safe on f5. So the main idea is that now white wants to take on f6. So here black took the knight on g4 with the king, but let's evaluate some alternatives. After rook takes e7, white captures with the rook, and after king takes, this king is now falling in a mating net. White can force a checkmate after h3, king to h5, g4, king to h4, and rook takes. So this is going to be the recurring idea in this position. So here after knight to g4, black tried taking the knight straight away, and after rook takes, if black captures on d7, we get this checkmate after h3. That's why here black tried the move king to h5, and now that we know the main idea, we understand the move that Magnus played, which is the move h3, planning to go g4 and then taking on h6, giving a checkmate. So black is in no time to capture the pawn on d7. Here actually black resigned, but black could have tried to continue a bit more by going g4, preventing this checkmate idea. But here Magnus had another very nice move, which is the move rook to f5, deflecting the rook from the d file. So white is given a check, and after rook takes, white simply promotes on d8. White could also take on g4 with a check first, or simply promote the queen straight away, and in this position white has a huge material advantage and a winning position. In the next position we have another top player, Hikaru Nakamura, playing against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, two very strong players, and here in this position white gave a pawn on the a file in order to try to attack black's king. So here we have opposite side castling, so both sides will try to attack each other, and black seems to be very solid on the queen side with this bishop and knight trying to defend the king. But here Nakamura made perfect use of this idea of sacrificing the pawn on the a file and played the very brilliant rook takes a7. And here black actually resigned. These are very strong players who see a lot of moves in advance, but let's try to understand why. So now white has an idea to take on b7, take on b6, black has to capture the rook. After bishop takes a7, queen takes b7, we get a checkmate. And if black takes the rook with the knight, then after queen takes b6, white again has way too many threats. Queen takes b7, queen takes a7, there's also the idea to capture the pawn e6. So black's position is just falling apart. For example, after queen to f7, white can simply capture the knight, and now white has two minor pieces for the rook, so white has a material advantage, and white still has the initiative. This king on c8 is very weak, so the position is just desperate for black. That's why Maxime Vachier-Lagrave decided to resign after rook takes a7. Now let's move on to the next position, where white has an extra piece, but on the other hand black is ready to attack and also planning to capture the knight on f5. So these positions can go wrong very easily for either side. For example, after a natural move like knight to g3, just retreating with the knight and attacking the queen, black can play the move queen to h3 and then checkmate is going to be unavoidable. So here white played the only clear move that kept the advantage, which was the shocking move queen to g3. On one hand, we can understand this idea that white is trying to defend actively by counter-attacking on g7, so now we have three pieces eyeing the g7 square, but black has a very simple fork by going knight to e2. So this is probably a move that some of us could play, but without understanding the main idea, because it seems that white is simply blundering a queen after queen to g3, but the idea is that after king to g2 and knight takes g3, now white gets this check with knight to e7, driving the king to the h-file, and this would be a fairly direct tactic if white had the move rook to h1 here, but rook to h1 is not possible because the knight is controlling that square, but here white simply captured the knight, and now white is ready to go rook to h1. So white can even afford to be momentarily a queen down, because rook to h1 is a very strong idea that will not only attack the queen but also the king. So here black tried king to h6, but black had this very tempting move of queen to e2 because black is giving a check, but the idea is that white will simply block the check, and even though black can save the queen, for example by taking the pawn on c4, after rook to h1 we get this very pretty checkmate with the rook and the knight. So black decided to play king to h6, giving back the queen, but after rook to h1, queen takes, rook takes, and king to g5, white captured on g7, and now white gets two minor pieces for the rook, so white has a material advantage, and white is also having a dominant position, so the game ended in just a few moves. And the last position is probably the most spectacular one. Here white gave a full rook, but white has an idea to get this knight, which is most likely going to be trapped, and also this king on h7 is a bit exposed. So here one idea would be to simply play bishop to e3, then castle long, and get this knight, where white has compensation for the material because white has very strong pieces and black still has to develop a lot of pieces. But instead white decided to develop the bishop in the most spectacular way. White simply played the move bishop takes h6, capturing this very important pawn because this pawn is protecting black's king, and here black captured the bishop, which as we'll see didn't work well for black. I just want to mention that in this very crazy position, black could have held the position with only moves, so knight to c6 was the best move in the position. In a way it makes sense because black develops and tries to counterattack, And also now black will have pressure on e5, which is going to be quite important in some lines. So just to show you one line on how the game could have continued, for example, after queen to f4, rook to f8, queen to g4, now black could have captured the bishop, and after queen to h3, king to g6, and queen to g4, we could get some sort of perpetual check. This position is just absolutely insane. I'm pretty sure that white prepared this whole position in advance. So taking on h6 was a very challenging move for black because black has to play only moves to hold the balance. So here black captured the bishop on h6, black took with the pawn. If black takes with the king straight away, we get a very similar idea, which is to attack the king after queen to e3. For example, if the king goes to h7, knight to g5, white is ready to attack the king, for example, after king to g8, queen to f4, planning to go queen to f7. Black has to either give the queen and get a losing position, or after rook to f8 and queen to h4, white still gets a winning attack. In the game, black took on h6 with the pawn, but this has a drawback of weakening the f6 square, so here white simply castled. And here black tried rook to e6, white doesn't care about this knight on h1, white went knight to f6, giving a check. Here black tried king to h8, if black takes on f6, this pawn is actually going to be very strong, and now there's also ideas to go rook to e1 and rook to e7, so this is still a desperate position for black. For example, here black might try knight to f2, and again white doesn't care about taking on f2, we definitely don't want to give this pawn f6, but here white can try rook to e1, planning to go rook to e7, and after knight to c6, queen to f4, now white is ready to push this pawn. So amazingly in this position, black doesn't have good ways to continue. For example, after d6 and f7, white is ready to go either rook to e8 or f8, promoting the pawn. And after knight to f6 and king to h8, here white played this very nice idea of knight to h4, bringing another piece to the attack. And after d6, queen to f4, attacking on h6, king to g7, queen to g4, king to h8, knight to g6, look at these very beautiful knights attacking black's king, king to g7, and here comes the final touch, knight to f8, giving a discover check, and here black resigned, not waiting for a checkmate after king takes f8, queen to g8, and queen to g7. So this move, bishop takes h6, was just an amazing move. Most likely white had a lot of preparation behind, but white still had to consider a lot of lines. So I hope that you liked these amazing moves from the last year. If you want to get better at chess, I have a free course that will provide you with a full training plan for that. Thanks a lot for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.